Hello, and welcome to the Journeys of Folco Hornblower, the One Ring 2nd Edition Strider Mode adventure.
It is a beautiful day early morning in the village of Bree, and a young Folco Hornblower, a Bree-Land hobbit, is diligently packing his meager belongings. Normally Folco would be dressed in his workday garments and gathering his tools, but this time was different. Having lived his entire young life in and around the lands of Bree, barely stepping outside the walled boundaries of the town proper, save for the times he would hunt with his kin for wild rabbit and other small game. His family, much the same, keeping and tending their small farmstead for generations, stayed quiet and local, no thought of adventuring out or even visiting their long-distant kin in the Shire. Not one to be shy or inquisitive about the comings and goings of other folk, Folco was all too keen to learn as much as he could from passerbys as he worked the family's farm, listening in on others' conversations on the green during market day, at the pony, or other gathering places in Bree. He was fascinated by the stories told by the dwarves, the rumors of the passing of the elves, and although others viewed them with complete suspicion, Folco was in awe with the rangers of the north, the hardy men who braved the wilds alone. Turning of age and against his father's warnings, young Folco decided to explore for himself the land surrounding Bree and beyond. After a chance meeting with the infamous Bilbo Mad Baggins at the pony a couple of years ago, and Bilbo seeing the spark of adventure within the young Hornblower, bid him visit his humble home at Bag Inn when he was ready for adventure. Folco, tossing a coin in the old town well, and turning back to wave goodbye to his family, his walking stick in hand, proceeded west along the east road towards the Shire, with his trusted pony Billy alongside, and a wide, glowing smile upon his face. The day was sunny and bright, and the spring air still cool, remnants from the colder than usual winter Bree and the surrounding lands had experienced for some time. The road was well worn with merchant travel to and from the west, as everyone in Bree knows that dwarves make good use of the road in moving their wares and wealth between their mountain holds. Folco never been west past the junction of the Great East Road and the Greenway, which runs north to south. "One day I'll see where this road leads, but not this day," he said to Billy, for he talked with his trusted pony all the time, tending to the fields of the family farm. Billy responded as he always did, with a quiet neigh and slight nod of his head, almost as if he had agreed with Folco. Soon, as the road made its way westward towards the Brandywine Bridge and the Shire beyond it, the road turned less and less into a well-tended road, but more of an infrequent trodden path dotted with worn stones, holes made from frequent rains, and ruts from much too heavy and overloaded wagons. The road meandered through the countryside and up and down rolling hills. On the north side were the plains that stretched all the way to the far north. To the south were the rolling hills and mounds of the Barrow Downs. Folco had heard of the stories of the Barrow Downs to stay as far away as possible, lest you're lost to the mists forever. "Let's stay to the north side, Billy. Much greener grass on that side anyway." Billy neighing approvingly. Evening approached, and they both settled for the night, tucked behind a large grass-covered boulder just off the road. Morning arrived, not with a whisper, but with a thunder, the rain almost falling parallel to the ground. Unfortunately for Folco, most of his, if not all of his provisions, save for some raw vegetables, had all been ruined by the rainfall. The road was made much worse as large puddles full of mud dotted the road for miles in either direction. The shoulders and surrounding lands fared no better, as for each step either Folco or Billy made, they sunk deep into the water-laden soil. The pace he set yesterday was half today, reaching just a handful of miles further than he had hoped. Knowing his food supply was now critically low, and before the day would end and night upon them, Folco took what remaining hours were left and went off into the plains north of the road to find sustenance. Unlike the abundant flora and fauna that he was used to seeing and finding in the Chetwood north of Bree, the area where he found himself was sparse with edible plants and small game. Fortunately, he didn't return empty-handed, and he had good enough to last him this evening and tomorrow. Billy was content with the early spring grasses along the road and where they had found a camp for the night, that when Folco returned with some foraged food, Billy was resting peacefully. The next day found them in a similar situation as the previous, cold, wet, and a pace lacking speed, so much so that Folco had become more and more disheartened with the journey so far. Is fate telling me to turn around and return home a failure? Or is this just how it was when one travels away from the safety of a warm hearth and a full stomach? Warily did he ask Billy. Billy responded in kind, giving a much forlorn neigh and seemingly pulling at Folco to turn back and return home. Folco briefly entertained the idea, but his resolve and sense of adventure was still too strong and unwavering, so continued did they go westward towards the Shire. Another day passed, and as the light of day presented itself, Folco realized he was finished the last day of his provisions of food. The journey had taken longer than he had thought, thinking he would be able to restore his supplies at the first market he come across in the Shire. But he still a full day's brisk walk to the Brandywine, he figured, so off he went to hunt for some wild rabbit and forage for whatever berry or root he might find. He was following a decent trail of a large-sized hare, which crossed from the North Plains over the road and into the edges of the old forests, just outside the Shire. Taking a moment to gather his wits and regaining the trail as it led down a fairly large rock-laden trench adjacent to the tree line, Folco carefully made his way down, when all of a sudden the gravel and rock gave way and he tumbled head over heels. The last thing Folco saw before going unconscious was a large boulder at the bottom of the trench. Billy, ever the faithful companion, stood at the top of the road, calling to him to wake up, but to no avail. Then, from along the way, a voice called to the pony. Who would this stranger be, and would he help young Folco, who now lay unconscious, slowly slipping away into the darkness?
The last thing Folco remembered was falling head over heels and coming face to face, all too closely, to a large rock at the bottom of a ditch off the Great East Road outside of the old forest and just east of the Brandywine Bridge. He woke up blurry-eyed to unfamiliar surroundings. A slight spring cool breeze was flowing through an open window, birds chirping just outside of it. His head throbbed with a dull ache, and touching his hand to his forehead, a cloth bandage was wrapped around it. "Where am I?" he said to himself. Looking around, he could tell he was in the home of a hobbit, a well-to-do hobbit at that. But who, mind you, would it be? Folco found himself in clean garments, and looking around his room, he noticed his normal wear was clean and hung up on a hanger on an armoire against the wall. He stood up from the bed, and taking a few moments for the weariness to wear off, he peered out the window, showcasing a panoramic view of rolling hills, a meandering river flowing through fields of wheat, barley, oats, and other edible crops. The smell of cooked bacon, potatoes, and freshly fried eggs came across his nose, and then the pang of hunger came over him as his stomach rumbled louder than he had ever heard in his life. "How long have I been asleep here that I'm this famished?" he muttered to himself. Stepping out into a circular hallway that would be Bag End, the home of the infamous Bilbo Baggins, Folco followed the scent of breakfast and into the parlor. "Well, it's about time, my young lads. For a moment there I thought you'd be sleeping for the week. But seeing as now you're up, let's get you fed," Bilbo said excitedly. "Oh, pardon my manners. I usually don't have guests, and when I do, they're not of the hobbit kind. I'm Bilbo Baggins. You've probably heard a tale or two about me." Folco stood, his face dumbfounded with the news, and about how of all places he ended up, it would be the home of Bilbo Baggins of Bag End. "As a matter of fact, Mr. Baggins, we met before, but I was much younger then. I'm Folco Hornblower, from the upper hillside in Bree. You bid me to come when I was old enough to in search of adventure. Well, it seems like you found me before I could find you, and in such a state it would seem, that I found myself here in your home without knowing it." Folco, puzzled about what had happened, rubbed his forehead and wincing at the pain of doing so. Bilbo let out a hearty laugh. "Well, I guess if I invited you here, fate seemed to play a part in me being at the right place for the right time to save you. When I found you, you had a nice gash on your head, and I don't suspect you would have woken up from that if I didn't come along. But sometimes fortune favors the brave, so I must commend you for taking my call for adventure and seeking me out. Bilbo turned around and waving Folco to enter the kitchen. Come now, breakfast is waiting. Folco sat down across Bilbo, and in front of him was a spread of food he hadn't seen for some time. Although his family wasn't poor, they weren't the most affluent of the Bree hobbits, and this by far was the finest breakfast he would have had up to this point. Well now, eat up. You need to get your strength up, as I think I'd like for you to do me a favor. Not for pulling you up from the ditch and bringing you back here. Oh, that reminds me. Your pony, he's safe and sound out back. Seems to be liking it here as well. Bilbo smiled and chuckled a little. Soon they finished breakfast, and Bilbo bid Folco to join him outside on his bench overlooking the valley and the water, and smoke some of his fine supply of Old Toby. Well, it's not too often I sit out here with a descendant of the best cultivator of pipeweed known in the Shire, Old Toby. You've probably never been told, but Folco Hornblower was the first hobbit to grow this fine plant that we're now going to enjoy together. Folco, with his ears and eyebrows perked, enthusiastically responded. This I didn't know, Mr. Baggins. I was never told this as a child. I wonder why my parents never told me this. Bilbo chuckled. As he lit his pipe, proceeded to take a few puffs and blow at a decent smoke ring. Come on now, let's see how the descendant of Tobold does to beat that. Bilbo grinning from ear to ear. Folco, having been taught the fine art of blowing smoke rings for some time, and of course being a regular spectator of the annual summer smoke ring festival in Bree, gave an approving nod and carefully cleaned his pipe, packed the Old Toby Bilbo handed him, and lit his pipe. What happened next could only be described as simply miraculous. At least that's the look that Bilbo gave as he saw Folco blow a smoke ring, actually two, so elaborately that the one ring that immediately followed the other went through the middle of the first, and then expanded, only for the first to then go through the second before both dissipated by the cool morning breeze. Bilbo looked at the smoke rings, then at Folco. Folco couldn't hardly believe what he had done. He didn't know what had become of him. I'm not sure where that came from. My apologies, Mr. Baggins, Folco said apologetically. Bilbo laughed. Well, my boy, you sure live up to the Hornblower name. I would say even Gandalf himself would be hard-pressed to beat that. And you know, being a wizard, he can do all sorts of tricks. Bilbo laughed, and after taking another draw, well now, we'll forego the customary exchange of your pouch of leaf with your acceptance of my favor to ask of you. Folco gently nodded in agreement. Good show. Well now, where was I? Oh yes. Well, you see, I have this missive that I need delivered to Bam Furlong. And the problem is, it's a little out of the way from where I was originally intended to be before recovering you from the ditch and bringing you back here to Bag End. Anyway, I'm in no mood to be a postman with the quick posts, as it were, so if you could do me this little favor, very much appreciated. And as you're keen to learn all about the Shire, well, there's no better way to go about doing that than walking it. Folco, visibly excited by the prospect of adventuring through the Shire, nods in agreement. Oh yes, Mr. Baggins, I'd be most honored to attend this deed of yours. Bilbo, slapping Folco's shoulder. Most excellent. Now let's go have a second breakfast and I'll send you on your way. No time to tarry. Your wound is all but healed, and I believe if you don't get your pony out from here, well, you'll never want to leave. Bilbo walked towards the open, round green door of Bag End. Oh, and don't call me Mr. Baggins. It's bad enough that Hamfast calls me that despite my objections. I don't want you doing it too. Very well, Mr. Bilbo. Folco chuckled, and with that Bilbo chuckled as well. By the end of the second breakfast, and after lunch, young Folco was ready, the missive neatly tucked in the inner pocket of his waistcoat. Billy the pony outside the gate to Bag End, neighing quietly. Well then, good luck and watch your feet. You'll never know where they'll end up taking you. When you're done, explore a little, and when you're needing to practice more of your smoke blowing, by all means come back. Oh, and if you find any information you think is worthy of noting in my memoirs, by all means let me know. I'm looking for all kinds of adventurous tales to add. And with that, Bilbo turned around, quickly went inside Bag End, the door closing with a thud and the sound of the lock engaging clear as day. Well now, Billy, hope you enjoyed that stay, but off we go. Let us hope this walk ends up much better than the last, Folco said to Billy. The route that Bilbo advised Folco take would bring him mostly by road to the Marsh, where Bam Furlong is located. Now, Bam Furlong is the name of the farm owned by one commonly known as Farmer Maggot. Checking the hand-drawn map that Bilbo had given him, Folco looked and studied the map as he casually strolled down Bagshot Row and on to the main road to Hobbiton. From there, he would proceed to Bywater, then travel east on the Great East Road all the way to Whitfurrows. Heading south, he would come to an open field and cross the Stock Brook just on the edge of the woods that dominate that portion of the Shire. Apparently, having crossed that way a number of times himself, Bilbo said it would cut a good day's travel and wouldn't be that hard to cross, as there will be a number of passable fords, especially now that the spring rains are waning and the start of summer is fast approaching. All in all, Folco figured the journey, barring any misfortunes or delays, would take him about roughly 20 leagues or 60 miles, a respectable 5-day jaunt for any man, let alone a hobbit. As Folco walks, Billy in tow, through Hobbiton, many of its inhabitants give Folco weary and inquisitive eyes, ever suspicious to any non-resident of the Shire, and especially of Hobbiton. And since Bilbo's disappearance and reappearance many years ago, Folco, not one to be completely shy, waved or nodded his head, expressing greetings of good days and fine weather we're having. Everyone met with a scowl, and a quick shaking of their heads, and back to whatever chore it was the other hobbits were doing. Not the most welcoming bunch, are they, Billy? Wonder what made them so foul? Folco casually asked, Billy neighing and snorting in response. Just outside of Hobbiton and along the banks of the water, Folco sat down and rested for a brief lunch. He didn't think to ask Bilbo if he had any, but it would have been nice to have had a rod at the moment, as fish were rising and gently breaking through the surface to eat whatever floating morsel, gnat, or other insect was had to be had. He continued on the way to Bywater, and as the late afternoon approached, both he and Billy were getting quite famished by walking along the road. The Green Dragon Inn presented itself, first by the delicious smells carried by the breeze, and then the clanking of tankards inside the stone walls and clay-tiled roof. Well, Billy, I think we deserve a nice meal and some ale before we head off. Looks to be some nice tall grass over there for you. I'll see you in a few. I shan't be long. Folco set Billy in a patch of grass near the inn, and he proceeded inside. Moments later, a just old enough to be here young hobbit woman by the name of Belle Goldworthy stood next to the table. Well, what will it be, stranger? She said in a quick and rough voice. Well, having not been here before, I believe I'll have whatever's on tap, and your dinner special, if there is any available. Folco, giving a casual smile. He's used to the prancing pony, and although his place doesn't have the same feel, he can definitely tell it's well visited, and hopefully the ale and the food is better than the welcomes he's had so far experienced in the Shire. Going out on the limb, eh? Well, coming right up. Food will be a fair bit longer, but the ale is ready. I'll bring a half pint over, and you'll just have to wait for the food. The ale was anything short of excellent, but by the time the fried fish and potatoes arrived, Folco was ready for another full tankard. The fish matched the ale, and itself was quite delicious and filling. Now, more than before, he wished for the fishing rod, as he was sure the fish was caught in the water or the pool adjacent to the inn. During his bites of fish and tasty potatoes, and the sips of the fine ale, Folco kept his ears keen to the conversations happening within the inn's tavern. Most of them had been about their day's work, seeding, weeding of their fields and front, side, and back gardens, and generally about everyday town gossip. But one conversation piqued Folco's interest, and it was about the Midsummer Eve parties that the old Took used to put on, with fireworks presented by the Grey Wizard himself. But no one has seen the wizard for some time, and it has been over 40 years since fireworks thundered in the sky. The conversation continued, but Folco finished the last of his food and ale, dropped a coin on the table for the fare, bid the patron farewell, and left. No one noticed his leaving, everyone being deep in conversation with one another. Billy was standing where he was left, and after giving a few brushes along his mane, Folco suggested that they continue on, as a few hours of daylight were still left, and he wasn't feeling a warm welcome as he thought so far. So why not a night under the stars on a cool night that would be clear and calm? Not one to waste time, Folco did notice, however, Bywater was a very nice and well-kept place. Everything was clean, and the road through was cobblestoned, with barely any dirt present. Coming to the junction with the Great East Road, Folco noticed the marker in the middle, and the east sign in particular. The 3 farthing stone, 3 miles east. Whitfurrows, 32 miles. The Brandywine Bridge, 42 miles. And there were other place names as well on the marker, but he was more concerned with what lay eastward. And turning to Billy, Folco said, "Well, 3 farthing stone it is. Don't believe we'll make it to Whitfurls before sundown, unless I ride you and you're as fast as a horse." Folco chuckled, and Billy neighing in amusement. And off they went, down the east road, the sun casting an even longer silhouette of them ahead. But this time in the evening, no traffic was to be had, and as he passed the occasional farmstead, no activity aside from the neighing of a distant pony, the mooing of a cow, or bleating of a sheep was to be seen or heard. Just as the sun was setting, Folco spotted the tall, freestanding stone marking the meeting place of the Shire's predominant farthings, the east, west, and south farthings. Folco and Billy settled for the evening as the stars began to appear, and letting the fire die down after his late evening snack and a smoke of old Toby, given to him by Bilbo, Folco fell asleep under the tree near the stone. Folco woke up to Billy pacing back and forth and neighing quite in fear, catching his breath and rubbing his eyes. Folco looked around at what could be spooking Billy so. Then off, behind the 3 farthing stone is where he saw it, and nothing he expected from the stories he's heard of the Shire. What he saw could only be ghosts to what he could tell. White, wispy things moved to and fro, an eerie sound sending chills down his spine. He packed up whatever he had out of his pack and quickly led Billy and himself down across the road to the south and on the other side. He went as far south as possible until the sight and sound of the ghosts were no more. "Well, I say, Billy, if it weren't for you seeing it too, I thought I'd just be a nightmare. But by golly, it's ghost all right." Folco's nerves were just about shot, and any chance for a restful sleep was all but gone. But, finding a nice patch of soft grass and a small hill, and with the night both clear and cool, Folco and Billy rested as peacefully as he could be expected, following that harrowing encounter at the 3 farthing stone. The warmth and light of the rising sun awakens Folco, the cool spring morning air slowly warming but still refreshing to his nose and lungs. "Well, at least those ghosts, or whatever they were around that stone, are no longer haunting us, Billy. Did you get a pleasant rest, my good friend?" Folco, brushing down Billy and hand-feeding him some dew-covered grasses. Billy neighed in approval, and as he almost always does. Folco prepared a small breakfast of fried ham, crispy bacon, and some fresh bread toasted over the small fire he had prepared. And as he sat and ate, he looked over the gently rolling hills of the South Shire. Surveying the land, he noticed also subtly, and what he would later attribute to the differences of each farthing, how the fields were kept, what had been divided, and what had been grown or what livestock were raised. To the south were wide fields of fruits and grapes and fields of growing pipeweed. To the west were smaller farms and pastures, where Folco could see rolling hills of grains and barley, fields with wildflowers suitable for nice-tasting honey, and seemingly open fields of scattered groves between the farmsteads that would be great places to hunt wild game. To the east, Folco noticed that although the hills rolled and some farms were present, it definitely seemed wilder and less attended. Off far to the southeast, and what Folco could only guess as per the map given to him by Bilbo, was the woody end, and beyond that, his destination of Ban Furlong in the Marish. "Well, I believe we'll head over in that direction," Folco, pointing towards the southeastern horizon, Billy nodding in approval. Cleaning up after camp and packing away his belongings, Folco and Billy trekked across the open fields of the south and east farthings. The walk was without incident, and being a nice warm spring day, pleasant and relatively relaxing. As midday approached and nearing what could only be the stock road that goes east to west across the part of the Shire, Folco stopped and broke for lunch. "No time for fires, Billy. Let's have a quick lunch and get on the road. And I want to get to the edge of the forest by nightfall. Hopefully just time enough to find a nice rabbit to cook tonight." Folco quickly made a sandwich made of cheese, thinly sliced sausage, and a couple of slices of tomato, and on the side a handful of cut carrots. Billy availed himself of the fine clover and other grasses that were growing in the field where they had stopped. Taking a look around, Folco did notice that darkened clouds were starting to roll in from the west. Nothing ominous, but concerning. Let's not tarry any longer. I have a sense that the weather may not be in our favor come evening. Off to the forest. Hopefully we'll get set up camp under a large tree for some good cover. So off they went, reaching the stock road and heading eastward along its path. The road seemed well traveled, either by foot or, as evident by the ruts in the soil, by cart. That being said, Folco could not see either hobbit or beast east or west, save for some grazing livestock off in the distant pastures on either side of the road. As late afternoon approached, the winds changed direction and started to pick up. As the darkened clouds Folco spotted before started to overtake the warm sun, and a chill filled the air. Folco pulled out his thin wool jacket from his pack and put it on. As evening approached, the distant roll of thunder was heard, and Folco quickly increased his pace. As he approached the edge of the woody end, amongst the thick expanse of beeches, white beams, and rowans, Folco set up camp under a large oak. Its thick, heavy branches provided some good cover for the impending rains to come. Well, we made it, Billy, and just in time, I might add. Another half hour and we'd be soaked to the bone. Folco, pulling out his flint and tinder, proceeded to light a fire as quickly as he could. No sooner had he done that, than the skies opened up with a thunderous roar, and the rain started to fall. With the falling rain and the air cold and damp, Folco pulled Billy in as close as he could to the fire for warmth. Cooking the last of his fresh meat and vegetables, Folco and Billy waited out the storm throughout the night. By morning, not much had improved since the evening, save for the rains changing to a foggy mist throughout the woods. The occasional sound of birds fluttering and squirrels squeaking in the branches of nearby trees broke the quiet hum of the forest. Folco could barely see a couple of 100 feet ahead of him, and it took him a number of moments to find his bearings and realize that he was a fair distance from the road. Nevertheless, after a quick breakfast, he and Billy proceeded eastward along the road through the forest, hoping to make it to Woodhall by nightfall. An ambitious plan on the best of days, Folco would soon learn it was folly to think he could make it, especially today. Although the road was frequently traveled, the heavy rains of the previous evening and morning and the continued mist and dampness made the road all but unpassable. Huge puddles of water, muddy potholes, and the occasional newly fallen tree made the journey arduous and significantly slowed his progress to Woodhall by evening. When Folco thought it couldn't get any worse, the rain started to fall again, making the road even worse than it already was. Folco and Billy tried their best to make good time, but by the time evening rolled around and with themselves and their gear soaked to the bone with rain, managed only half the distance they had hoped, 6 or 7 miles Folco wagered. Before the last of the daylight left, Folco once again set up camp under a heavy oak and lit a fire as best he could given the circumstances. The fire smoldered in smoke, and eventually a flame arose. Well, Billy, let us hope this fire will last and the old Toby is still dry. And with that, Folco sitting against the trunk of the oak, Billy resting beside him, took out his pouch of old Toby given to him by Bilbo, packed it into his fine pipe, and proceeded to light it. Without fail, Folco was quickly taking in a number of draws and ensuring the pipe was hot and well smoldering. After a few moments, he proceeded to practice his smoke ring blowing. Folco wished he didn't take out his pipe that evening. Under the heavy rain and the darkened forest of the woody end, and whatever energies lay hidden in the wood, Folco didn't know, but there was something dark about it, and as he proceeded to puff out smoke rings, and whether it was the dryness of the pipe weed combined with the heavy dampness of the air, the fine pipe that was handed down to him by his grandfather Tobias Hornblower split, cracked, and burst like a fireball, sending embers of old Toby all over the place. A moment of awe fell across Folco, and Billy was startled by the image. Then, despair, Folco felt, and sadness as his family heirloom now lay splintered in his hand on the forest floor. Folco looked at the remains of his pipe, and quietly picked up the pieces he could find, and wrapping it up in his pocket handkerchief, he carefully placed it in his pack. He took a deep breath and tried to resolve and calm his mind from the sorrow of this happening. Letting out his breath slowly, Folco turned to Billy. No worries, Billy. Plenty of fine pipes to be had. We're in the Shire after all, and if you can't find a good pipe here, well, you wouldn't be able to find one anywhere. Just a minor setback, that's all. Besides, the old Toby gave us a little light show in the end now, didn't it? Billy neighed and nodded, and they both settled in for the evening, reassured that tomorrow would be better. At least that is what they had hoped. The evening and night passed without incident, and whatever storm rolled through the previous day had now passed. The sun shone through the canopy made by the trees just enough to warm both Folco and Billy, and almost dry their clothes. Emboldened by the warmth and the sounds of the forest animals echoing through the trees, Folco, after breakfast, proceeded again eastward along the stock road. The road still was a difficult mess to pass, as the trees of the woody end provided enough shade that even the high noon sun couldn't completely dry it. Progress was a little faster, but not enough to make it any further than Woodhall before time for supper. Folco, weary from the sleeping wet in the forest and without a pipe to keep his spirits up, decided to take rest in Woodhall and continue on in the morrow. As Folco came to the outskirts of the village, all manners of hobbits were present, some returning from the wood with spoils from their hunt, others pushing barrels of freshly dug up root vegetables, and others pulling carts full of cut wood. As Folco passed by, he noticed they were much more pleasant than he had expected, everyone giving a smile and a nod, a quick hello and a good evening, but carrying on with whatever they were doing, minding their own. Walking through the town, Folco happened on a sign of a shop, and a grin came across Falco's face. The sign read, "Rosefield's Pipe and Smoke." "Well, would you look at that, Billy? Fortune favors us this day," Folco enthusiastically said to Billy. Unfortunately, when Falco tried the door, it was firmly locked and no sign or sound of anyone inside. Falco asked a passing hobbit if the proprietor was open, and with a short and curt response, Folco learned it would be open by tomorrow. Feeling a little disappointed, Folco proceeded further down the main thoroughfare, coming on to what could only be the inn and tavern, a place called Wood's End. The clanging of tankards, the singing of song, and the resting of plates on tables could be heard inside. But what caught Falco's attention was the sweet smell of what could only be freshly baked pies or cake. "We'll rest up here tonight, my good friend. I'll see what's inside, and save you some of that which smells so good," Folco said to Billy as he tied him up off to the side where a patch of grass, left relatively untouched, had been growing. Walking through the front doors of the establishment, Folco was welcomed by a stout hobbit, most likely the proprietor. "Greetings, my young lad. Welcome to Wood's End, the finest inn this side of the Brandywine." And with that, a number of cheers from the tables and clanking of tankards rang through the room. "My name is Odo Grubb, and what did your mother call you? Are you looking for room, ale, or both?" A big smile came across Odo's face. His hands rest on each side of his waist. "Well, Folco Hornblower is my name, and I'm looking for both, actually, but especially whatever that delicious smell would happen to be. Hopefully it's something to eat and not just a decorative flower," Folco said, taking another deep smell. "I can definitely tell you're not from around here, or I'm sure you would have heard about my missus's famous, most delicious and decadent bilberry cakes. Where do you hail from, anyway?" Odo asked inquisitively, perplexed that Folco didn't know about the cakes. "Well," pausing for a moment to consider his answer, "I'm born and raised in the Bree-Land, and I've come to explore the Shire I've heard so much about." A big smile came across Odo's face. "Well, I can honestly say we haven't had any visitors from Bree stay here, let alone a Bree-Land hobbit. Either way, welcome. Let's get you settled at a nice table and get some of that cake ready for you. Who knows, I just may get you to take some of the cake back with you to Bree. Could open a new market. I'm sure the big folk would love the cakes the missus's bakes, and if they don't, well, that's their loss." Laughing, Odo scurries back into the kitchen, shouting orders to what could only be Mrs. Grubb. Folco heard Mrs. Grubb shouting back in return, with some not-so-kind words thrown in for good measure. The spread of food that was delivered was delicious. Fried fish and chips, paired with some ale, finish off with a decadent bilberry cake. And, as Folco later found out, is also served on occasion in many of the inns of Stock and Frogmore. Folco observed the comings and goings of Woodhall hobbits, and although none cared or asked about Folco, or where he had come from aside from Odo, he sensed that these were more welcoming folk, content with what they have and do, and no minding to others' businesses. No sooner did Folco finish his meal and ale than walked in a grizzled, wary-looking hobbit, who'd seen better days. By his garments he looked like a woodman, who spent more time felling trees than sitting near a warm hearth. Odo quickly went over to the gentleman. "Well, Bearlack, haven't seen you around in a while. What brings you?" Mincing no words and in a deep, gruff voice, "Food and ale, and then I'll be off." That beast is back out there again, and it's about time someone does something about it. Berlac sat down on the stool. Another hobbit, Folco never found out his name, walked over to Berlac, questioning him about what he saw. All Folco could make out, and then hearing the murmurings from other patrons in the tavern about the Black Wolf of Woody End. Folco waved Odo over after seeing Berlac his meal and asked what was going on. Odo, leaning in towards Folco. Well, you see, ever since we were all children here in Woodhall and in the surrounding Yale, stories have been told of the Black Wolf, who hunts and hunts prey in the Woody End since before I was born. Where this beast comes from, who knows, but some say it's a descendant of one of those beasts who came down from the north during the fell winter. We use the stories to scare the children to be nice and respectful, lest they find themselves alone near the wood and the Black Wolf of Woody End take them to its den for a light supper. Now, all of us older folk know that this is just a tale, and it works to keep the young ones in line. However, old Berlac over there, who probably spends more time in the woods than anywhere else here ever does, well, he's been tracking a beast through the wood for a while now, scaring the livestock, taking away the laying hens, and even the occasional hound has went missing. Children are afraid to play anywhere near the trees now. Maybe the stories are true. Maybe not. Either way, all we can do is keep working away. With that, Folco took the piece of bilberry cake he left for Billy and went out to feed it to him. The night was crisp and cool, the sky clear, and the stars shone brightly. People were still milling about, and no one seemed to care about the story of the Black Wolf. But regardless, Folco, securing Billy, gave him a good brushing and then retired to his room. Morning came, and after a hearty breakfast, Folco thanked Odo for the rum and meal and found Billy where he had left him. The village again was alive with hobbits milling about, and Folco proceeded to head over to Rosefield to inquire about another pipe. Opening the door, and by the tinging of the doorbell, Folco was greeted by who he could only think of as Rosefield. "Welcome to Rosefields. Do you wish to trade or buy?" Folco letting out a slight cough and a sigh. "To buy. Unfortunately, my pipe exploded. I'm in need of a replacement." "Exploded? My word. Don't believe that's ever happened to me. Why, let me take a look at it. See if I can fix it." Rosefield held out his hand, and Folco, digging into his pack, gave him the broken pieces of pipe he had wrapped in the handkerchief. Laying it on the counter, Rosefield carefully unwrapped the handkerchief, and looking at the shards of the pipe, he nodded. "I mean, I'm good, but I'm not that good. Whatever you put in there really did a number on it. Fine-looking pipe, too. Old. Must have been in your family for some time. Pity. Could have offered you a nice trade for it, if you wanted. Well, considering the state you're in, what were you looking for? I have all types of pipe to suit every need. Small ones, long ones, skinny and fat ones. Some old, some young, some from here and very far away, even some dwarf ones from as far away as Erebor." Rosefield pointed to the many pipes on display. "Well, I'm a hornblower, and I've just found out that an ancestor of mine was none other than Tobold Hornblower of Old Toby fame. Just so happens that Old Toby is the leaf that turned my pipe into a firecracker. So, do you happen to have anything that would suit me in this stash of Old Toby?" Folco, puffing out his chest and dropping the hornblower name, said excitedly. Rosefield, grinning like an old fox, opened a drawer from underneath his counter, pulled out and placed a dusty wooden box on display. Brushing the dust off, he opened the lid and presented to Folco a finely crafted briarwood smoking pipe. Longer than his other, and with a bigger bowl but smaller chamber, and with a nicely inlaid leaf wrapping around the heel, Folco knew that this was well-made smoking pipe. "I was waiting for the right hobbit to come in here and look for one of my pipes. As soon as you said your last name, I knew this was the one. You see here, this leaf, it's actually an exact match to what leaf the Old Toby is from. So it's fitting that an ancestor of the cultivator himself should have it. Here, try it. No need to use your own. I'll pack some of my Old Toby in for you." And before Folco could say yes, a fully packed and ready to be lit pipe was in his hand. Folco proceeded to light the pipe, and carefully this time, drawing in a few draws, proceeded to blow a number of smoke rings as best he could. Like the results of his competition with Bilbo, Folco did something similarly spectacular, blowing one ring through the other, and then a third expanding and contracting over the first two. Rosefield clapped in amazement and let out a hearty laugh. "My eyes have seen it all. You do carry that name well, my boy. Well, it seems you were destined to come here, and I was destined to give you this pipe. Normally I charge fair prices anyway, however I'll give you a great deal regardless. Half off, as you definitely gave me a great show this day." After exchanging further pleasantries and Rosefield showing off some of his collected pipes from near and far, Folco bid him farewell and thanked him for the finely crafted briarwood Rosefield pipe with the old Toby leaf inlay. Emboldened with the new find, Folco untied Billy, and after asking a number of the locals about how best to cross the Stockbrook, he was pointed in a number of directions just east of Woodhall, past the edges of the forest, where a number of small fords can be easily traversed by both hobbit and beast. By noon of that day, Folco reached the waters of the Stockbrook, and he could see the water levels, despite the recent rains in the area being just low enough to see a number of stones break through the surface. Thinking it best to cross and then have lunch, Folco decided to test the waters and make his way across. Without fail, reaching the other side, Folco set Billy to graze on the nearby grasses, as he sat and ate lunch, taking in the sounds of the meandering brook. By the mid-afternoon of the 5th day since leaving Bag End and making his way across the marsh, he finally reached a long brick farmhouse with a thatched roof surrounded by great fields of vegetables. As Folco approached, the high walls and gates surrounding the farmhouse, etched into a wooden sign, was marked Bam Furlong. Folco had reached his destination. But before Folco could even touch the gate to open it, a terse voice from behind Folco called him. "Now where do you think you're going uninvited?" Folco turned to see a young but broad hobbit, not much younger or older than himself, leaning upon a shovel, eyeing Folco closely. "Well, state your business, and then be off. As you can see, I'm quite busy." Folco, taking a swallow and a breath in, steadying Billy as he replied, "Well, I'm here to deliver a letter from a Master Baggins to this here place, Bam Furlong, as I can read on the sign over there. Are you the master of this house?" No sooner had Folco removed the letter from his inner vest pocket than the would-be hobbit farmer snatched it out of his hands and ripped it open. After reading a few lines, he let out a deep laugh and seemed to relax into an amiable hobbit. "I was told you were coming, but I wasn't sure I would have actually seen you in the flesh. It's quite a long journey from Bag End, as you know. Please follow me. You must be hungry, thirsty, and quite weary by the looks of you. Food will be ready in no time. You can set your pony on the patch of grass behind the house. Yeah, he'll be okay, I'm sure." And with that, Folco and Billy were behind the gates of Bam Furlong, and Folco ushered into the warm, comfortable home of one Farmer Maggot. As Farmer Maggot leads Folco to set Billy behind the main building of Bam Furlong, and then into the main foyer inside of his home, Folco smells the familiar scent of Old Toby. "I smell you're a connoisseur of the Old Toby as well," Folco asked inquisitively. "Not quite. I more fancy the Southern Star myself, but my guest seems to like the Toby. He's right here in the parlor, and he informed me that I should expect you to pay me a visit." And with that, Farmer Maggot leading Folco into the parlor, Folco spots none other than Bilbo Baggins, sitting comfortably in a lounging chair, pipe in hand, grinning excitedly. "Well, my young lads, you've done it. You've passed the test. I was worried you might fall into ill fortune like you had when I found you on the East Road outside the Shire. But looks like you've made it here none the worse the wear, and in great time, I might add. I'd half expect you to have been still drinking ale or eating some fine food in the many inns you would have passed. Tell me, did you follow the route I suggested, or did you let your feet take you into more unfamiliar roads and trails?" Bilbo, now standing, pipe in hand and mouth, and his right hand resting in his pocket. Before they could continue on with their discussion, Farmer Maggot bid them to the dining area, and they all sat down for mid-afternoon tea and biscuits. Folco proceeded to tell Bilbo and Farmer Maggot his journey from Bag End to Bam Furlong, about the ghost of the 3 farthing stone, the exploding of his old pipe, showing off his new pipe with an old Toby design inlay, and of course the rumors and tales of the Black Wolf of Woody End. With the mention of the Black Wolf, both Bilbo and Farmer Maggot tilted their heads and looked at one another, Folco giving them each an inquisitive look and a low, "What?" "Let's clean up first before we get down to business," Farmer Maggot said with a low, somewhat distressed voice, clearing the dishes, pouring another round of tea from the pot resting on the table in each other's cups. Maggot sat down and leaned back into his chair. As he spoke, he carefully packed some of the Southern Star into his pipe, lit it, took in a couple of draws. "Chickens. It is because of my chickens that I sent my letter, Master Baggins, and to be honest, I thought you would have sent more help than this young hobbit right here. When I saw that thing that night, blood in its teeth and fire in its eyes, I knew it was something beyond the ken of myself or any other folk in the East Farthing. It was a beast, I tell you, and not some hungry wolf that came up from the Dunland starving. This was a black thing, as if its fur had been burnt like kindling, with nothing natural about it, and it sent chills down my spine. No easy task, mind you, but when I heard it growl at me, we locked eyes, and I saw naught but a lust for death in its gaze. It meant to kill me more than my chickens in that coop that night, guaranteed. So I grabbed a lantern in one hand, you see, and my chopping axe in the other. If it was going to take me, I wasn't going down without a fight. Before I knew what happened, it was on me, crossing the field in a bound and pinning me to the soil, snarling and slavering." Taking in another deep draw of Southern Star, Farmer Maggot continued. "In a fit, I swung my lantern up and it shattered, pouring oil upon its muzzle. It yelped and screamed, and as the fire blazed, and it fled into the dark. The last thing I saw before it disappeared towards the Brandywine were those horrible, fiery eyes." Pausing, he sets his pipe on the bench beside him. "It's still out there. I swear I've seen it beyond the edges of Bamfurlong more than one night since then. Those eyes burning into me from the dark. And if the stirrings from Buckland, and as you say Folco Woodhall, are any hint, it is causing no end of trouble elsewhere in the Shire. Master Bilbo, sir, I was hoping that you or Falco might help me and the Buckland folk put a stop to this foul thing, making sure that it doesn't hunt anything else before it gets a taste for something more than chickens." Bilbo, nodding and puffing out some smoke. "Well, that's why I've brought Folco along. As you can see, he's quite capable to investigate, and according to him, he's a great woodsman." Bilbo, nodding over to Folco to comment. Folco, following suit, drawing and puffing smoke, opened his mouth to talk, but was quickly interrupted by Farmer Maggot. "Before you say anything, Folco, there's not much I can offer you from my pockets for reward. Besides my eternal gratitude to the safety of my chickens, and myself, I might add, you'd always have a clean bed to sleep on and a warm meal to eat." Folco, nodding to both Farmer Maggot and Bilbo. "That's a most generous offer indeed. I've been hunting game in the Chetwoods since I could barely remember. My grandfather taught me everything I knew, and he was as good as hunter and woodsman as any ranger out there. If there is a wolf to be found and taken care of, well, I'm sure I'll be able to find it." Folco, not completely sure he sold himself proper, sat back and took a long, deep draw of his pipe and slowly let out of the smoke. "Well then, my boy, that settles it. I'm glad it's you and not the others I was going to send along to Farmer Magnet. You've got some real experience already under your belt, unlike most I know around here," Bilbo grinning. "Now then, rest up and head out early in the morrow. I'll help out Farmer Magnet with getting some provisions for your hunt. Speaking of which, where best for you to start?" With that, Farmer Magnet pipes in. "The most recent word I've heard from Buckleberry is that it has somehow crossed the Brandywine and troubling the farms in Buckland and the Brandybucks. Probably best you make your way to the Buckleberry Ferry and cross there, unless you like to swim." Maggot, uncharacteristically letting out a small chuckle. His face returned back to the grimness he's shown for most of the conversation. "One other thing. Not sure what that Woods fellow in Woodhall has seen, but I've only ever seen or heard of this creature coming out at night. Not sure how that helps, but it's something else, at least, to think about." With that, Farmer Magnet bid them, Bilbo and Folco, to rest and relax as he attended to his chores around the farm. Supper and evening came and went, but as Folco settled in for the night into bed, a low, distant howl of a wolf could be heard, or at least that's what he thought it was. Folco rested his hand under his head and against the pillow, looking straight up at the ceiling. What have you gotten yourself into now, Folco Hornblower? He asked himself. With the crowing of the farm rooster, Folco rose quickly from bed. The smell of breakfast was already permeating through the house, and Falco's stomach started to rumble. Falco quickly dressed and went into the dining area. Bilbo was already seated, and Farmer Magnet was serving a spread of eggs, bacon, and crispy hash browns, all garnished with some delicious-looking mushrooms. Well, good morning, Falco. Was the bed kind to you this past night? Farmer Magnet asked while setting a place for Falco at the table. Sitting down and rubbing his hands, seeing the spread of food before him. Kind, very kind. Although I did hear what I thought was a howl of a wolf in the distance. Not sure if either of you heard it as well. Farmer Magnet and Bilbo quietly nodded, both looking at each other and then at Falco. Bilbo spoke. We were just chatting about that before you came in. We heard it as well, and something must be done for sure, lest, like Farmer Magnet suggested last evening, it garners the taste for more than just his chickens. Bilbo, looking down at his plate, forking a morsel of food, nodding his head, and took a bite. Either way, you best leave after lunch. It'll take you most of the day to get up to Buckleberry Ferry, and by that time it should be early evening. Like I said, only seeing the beast shortly after dusk, so you can start in Buckland after you cross that river. Farmer Magnet sang as he himself sits down with a plate and setting down the pot with some tea. Not much was said following that, other than comments about the weather, the long list of markets to come that Farmer Magnet wants to attend, and other seemingly unimportant gossip of the marriage. Falco prepared for the hunt, ensuring his spear was strong, his bow and string oiled and clean, and the fletching, shaft, and tips of the arrows were in good form. Falco securely strapped his pack and other supplies to Billy, who, up until now, was quietly content at Bamfurlong, and it took Falco a little coaxing to get him to agree to come along for the hunt. Well, Falco, looks like you're all set, Bilbo said as he came to say and see Falco preparing. My adventuring days and hunting are long behind me, Falco. Would like to again go on a little adventure, but I think this one's a little bit too much for me. Bilbo paused, Falco noticing that he was lost in a deep memory. Oh, yes. Well, here's to your success in hunting down this wolf. Farmer Magnet wanted you to have this. Will keep your strength up and good for a few days, just in case those Bucklanders don't feed you well enough. Bilbo laughing as he handed Falco a sack of full, fresh, picked mushrooms from Farmer Magnet's farm. Much appreciated, and tell Farmer Magnet thank you. I hope I'm not gone too long, but I'll be back. Shouldn't be too hard. Don't expect many wolf packs troubling the Shire too much. Falco giving a sly smile, looking out toward the distant edge of the woody end. Farewell, Falco, and we'll see you in a couple of days. Bilbo, bidding Falco a swift goodbye. Falco led Billy down the raised path of Bamfurlong onto the raised causeway leading to the main road that connects Stock to Rushy, along the western bank of the Brandywine. Unlike the rest of the Shire, as Folco could tell, most of the buildings that dot the soggy landscape, if not all of them, are stout buildings of brick and thatched roofs with no traditional smeals to be seen. Even the road itself is raised high above the adjacent farmland, seemingly to keep the path much drier than the land below. As the sun sets in the west and the evening begins, Folco sees the ferry in the distance, noticing a couple of specks of light flashing near it. The sun sets past the horizon as the shadows cast by the trees lining the sides of the causeway begin to meld into one. Folco notices the cool evening air feeling strangely still and eerily quiet. Approaching closer to the road that begins off leading to the ferry, a sense and a moment of dread washes over Folco, Billy bucking and nodding his head and fro, sensing something is afoot. Whoa, boy, whoa. Folco, stopping at the junction, his hands now clenched, his spear in one hand and his bow in the other. He calms Billy and looks around, keeping an eye out to the trees and sides of the road. Folco noticed movement, first behind a distant fence of a farm, and as he walked towards the winding road to the ferry, he also noticed movement behind a row of distant hedges, and once again behind more farmhouses. With the ferry now just a long stone's throw away, and illuminated by a set of lanterns, and starlight reflecting off the Brandywine, a sense of ease comes over Falco. Well, for a minute there I thought there would be and before Falco could finish the sentence, and out of the corner of his eye, he spotted it. A set of cold, red eyes rose from the ditch along the northwestern edge of the road. Falco wasn't sure what it was. Was it a dog? Was it a wolf? Or other strange creature from afar? With the starlight and the flickering dim light from the lamps near the ferry, Falco could notice the fur of the creature looking singed as if it burnt, and the color cold like ash. The eyes gleamed fiery as the creature prowled closer and closer, each step signaling a predatory confidence of seasoned predator. Interestingly, Falco noticed heard no growl or sound from it, not even the footfalls as it made its way closer to Falco and Billy. The beast was large, its shoulder reaching the height of even the most tallest of hobbits. Falco noticed it snarl, showing large, pearl white fangs stained pink, and then, like a flash of lightning, it charged at Falco. Falco barked out to Billy to head to the ferry, Billy trotting off in agreement. Falco, spear in one hand and bow in the other, turns to face his foe. Falco barely had enough time to react as he set his left foot forward and threw his spear at the beast, now in full charge against him. As soon as the spear left his hand, he swung his left hand, holding the bow, and pulled out and knocked an arrow and pulled it, aiming it as true as he could, given the darkened early night. The spear struck true, its metal head slicing a deep gash along the side of the charging beast, neither making a sound or slowing its charge at Falco. With no time to think, Falco released the arrow, and it flew with precision, striking the wolf-like creature deep into the vital areas of its chest. The creature let out an unnerving howl as it crumpled out and fell over, dead, 10 to 15 feet in front of Falco. Falco scarcely could believe what had happened as he stared blankly at the now still and silent body of the beast. Falco heard another sound coming from behind the creature, off into the shadows of the hedges and line of trees. "Well done, my young friend. You fell that beast fast. I'm impressed." The gruff, rough voice of a hobbit Falco heard. Coming into the dim light of the shadows, Falco noticed the hobbit was none other than Bearlac of Woody Hall. "Looks like you did me a favor. Been tracking this beast for a couple of days now. Guess he wasn't that tough after all," Bearlac giving a smirky grin. "The name's Bearlac Bulger. Who by chance are you?" Bearlac, after picking up Falco's spear off the ground and handing it to him. "Folco Hornblower. Saw you at Woody's End just a couple of nights ago. You mentioned the beast, or what I think is the beast you call the Black Wolf." Falco, taking the spear, wiping off the now bloodied spearhead with a rag from his pack. "Yeah, it's the Black Wolf, all right. Been troubling the Woody End and now these parts for the past couple of weeks. Glad it's finally been taken care of." Both Falco and Bearlac heard and turned towards what only could be another growl of a creature similar to the one that now lay motionless on the road. Bearlac, turning around to look in the general direction and slowly stepping back. "I really don't think we should be standing much longer here. To the ferry!" Falco and Bearlac quickly turned and ran to the ferry, untying it from the mooring and pulling it across the Brandywine. As they both turned and looked back, a dark, shadowy, wolf-like creature moved towards the other, dead creature, then turned to show both Falco and Bearlac menacing, red glowing eyes. Without notice, it darted and ran northward into the trees, Falco losing sight of it in the darkened cover of the cool night. The trip across the Brandywine goes without incident, as they step off the ferry onto the ramp and Falco guiding Billy off of it and onto the path. A quick and terse voice is heard from ahead of them. Turning the corner of a nearby building just ahead, Falco and Bearlac notice a bounder, lantern in one hand, and the other resting on a sheathed sword. "Don't you know you're not supposed to be using the ferry at night? Foul things are afoot these days, and the master has ordered all visitors to be escorted to Brandy Hall at once." The bounder now ushering the two hobbits to follow him promptly. Falco noticed the bounder being particularly hurried and out of sorts. Falco, following suit as they all walked northwards along one of the roads of the Buckland. "Well, we appreciate the offer, but we can definitely take care of our own. What is it that troubles this master, that you're having to escort us to Brandy Hall?" Falco, off put by the order of the Buckland watchman. The bounder stops and turns around and looks at Falco. "Look, we know how the rest of you from the Shire view us, but here in Buckland we make sure things are good and proper. And we make sure that those are not from here are good and safe. And proper too. So if that means I escort you to the Master of Buckland because he says so, by all means, that's what I'll do. Sure. We're not looking for trouble. We're just here to ask some questions about the creature troubling Buckland, like it has Woodhall and folks in the Marish. Falco, quickly to chime in about his intent. The bounder again stops, turns around, and eyes both Falco and Bearlac. So you know about the attacks? Well, it's a good thing I'm taking you to see the Master. He may have some use for you after all. Not mincing further words, a short while later, Falco and Bearlac are led to a relatively large smile, and with many windows and 3 large doors with many smaller doors set along the slopes of a large hill. Lush pots are full of a variety of plants, flowers, and the ground surrounding immaculately tended to. The bounder, asking Falco and Bearlac to stay at the end of the step, leading to one of the main doors, knocks on it. A few moments pass, and then the large circular door of what Falco learns later is Brandy Hall swings open, and an older, portly, balding hobbit presents himself. Late is the hour, Braddock. What ill news do you have to tell me? The portly hobbit peers over the shoulders of Braddock and sees Falco, Bearlac, and Billy just behind them. Visitors! This late in the evening. Glad to see my orders are being followed. Yes, well, you see, I found these 2 hobbits crossing the Brandywine at Buckleberry Ferry, and, well, I promptly escorted them here by your order. Apparently they're here to ask questions about the creature, Braddock said. Quick, let us not tarry outside any longer. Your journey must have been long. Braddock, lead them into the parlour, and I'll fetch you some tea and biscuit. And with that, Falco and Bearlac are led into Comfort Hall of Brandy Hall. Entering the parlour with a platter of biscuits, cups, and a pot of tea, the portly gentleman bids everyone to sit. Well, gentlemen, the name's Gorboduc Brandybuck, and as you've probably already come to the conclusion, I'm the Master of Buckland proper. Gorboduc sits down on a large, leather-bound chair and quickly picks up his pipe that is laid on the nearby table, and proceeds to light it and take a few draws in, slowly puffing out some smoke. As the night is late, feel free to stay here tonight. Plenty of room here, and the beds are quite comfortable. But let's talk about the creature. That, and he pauses for a few moments and continues. The creature that has been troubling us Bucklanders for a night or so. Not much happens around here outside the occasional dwarf having a few too many drinks while passing through, but a beast from the old forest? Been years since trouble from the old forest has haunted us Bucklanders. Hate to think that everyone will do if we don't get this under control and solved right now. Gorboduc puffs on his pipe some more. Now, I do find it hard to believe what's troubling us is also troubling what did you say before? Woodhall and the farms in the Marish? Can't see the beast crossing the Brandywine, unless via the bridge, but I haven't heard anything further up north complaining of missing livestock. But I have heard a few farms in Newbury, and just last night Rollo Boffin sounded the alarm, claiming he saw the very beast on the edge of his property in Crick Hollow. Either way, just a matter of time, a hobbit, one of our tweens, or worse, our young children get attacked by this thing. Bearlac leans in. Well, there's more than just one. Sounds like there's 2. Falco here just fell one of these beasts on the other side of the ferry. Great shot I might add. But the beast, no creature of Harrow, just a wolf. I'm sure we can take care of this, no question. Falco, letting out a few quick coughs. Well, I got real lucky with that shot, but Bearlac is right. Looks to be just a wolf that charged me at the ferry, but appears not to be alone. As we were crossing the Brandywine, we looked back to see another wolf, same size, and with the same bright red eyes, sniff around the other body and then bolted northwards along the banks of the river. Gorboduc took in a deep breath, then let out a measured sigh. I may be the Master of Buckland, but I have no right to tell anyone what to do. That being said, if you're already sticking your nose into this matter, by all means go right ahead. But be careful, there's something foul about these creatures. With that, Gorboduc bids them a good night, and retires down one of the many halls of Brandy Hall. Falco and Bearlac take no time to retreat into their assigned rooms and rest for the night. Falco awakes by a tapping outside of his room door. Opening the door, after quickly getting dressed, Falco is greeted by a well-dressed hobbit. Ah, you must be Falco. I've awoken your companion Bearlac, and he's to meet us in the parlour. My name is Saradas Brandybuck, and being unfortunate news of another attack over the night. Whispering quietly to Falco, quickly leading him to the parlour of Brandy Hall, Let's not bother father with this. I believe the stress will get to him otherwise. Entering their parlor, Folco sees Bearlac sitting down with another hobbit, a one Rollo Boffin, as they are in deep discussion. Ah, Folco, come here. We've got some interesting info from old Rollo here about the other beast. Sit, take a listen. Bearlac waves Folco over. Aye, well, I was saying, Rollo, seemingly losing his train of thought. Well, the wolf, nay, beast, black as night the fur was, smelled of burnt hair, those eyes red as the flame of the fire over there, stalked back and forth near the edge of my property. Oh, it was hungry all right, if not plain rabid for my flesh. I panicked and fled, running as fast as my feet could go here to Brandy Hall. Please, would you rid of this plague? Nothing good will come of it. Something bad, if nothing is done. A cough is heard behind the gathering party, and Gorbaduc is in the parlor doorway. Rollo is right. Something must be done. It seems you, Folco, and you, Bearlac, have been tracking this beast, or the pair, for some time. I need to keep my watchmen on patrol here, but if you wouldn't mind investigating Rollo's farm in Crick Hollow, may lead to the whereabouts of this beast. Bearlac stands up and looks to Gorbaduc. Well, I didn't come here to be pampered in these halls. There's a wolf to be called, and I would like to get back to the Woody Hall, seeing that is done. Folco stood and nodded in agreement. After a quick breakfast, and just as the sun rises over the old forest to the east, Folco and Bearlac, guided by Rollo, head to his property in Crick Hollow. Folco taking the barest of his supplies, leaving Billy at Brandy Hall. Billy, appearing none to be concerned, enjoying the nice grasses that grew alongside the hill. Bucklanders of all shapes and sizes, from children, tweens, to old, all whisper to each other and stare at the three hobbits now walking through Buckland from Brandy Hall. Folco, spear and bow in each hand, Bearlac, his axe slung in one hand resting on his shoulder, bow in the other, and Rollo, sweating at the brow already, setting the pace to get to his farm in Crick Hollow. The three reach Rollo's place, a nondescript, small but homely house similar in architecture to those seen in the main passages in Mickle Delving. The home is, unlike the rest of Folco had seen in Crick Hollow, lies near the high hay, and incidentally, the edges of the old forest. So I steps out to the house that evening, and there it was, plain as the moon on a clear night, over there. Rollo, wasting no time in pointing in the general direction of the wall of the high hay. Folco looked at Bearlac, both now casually walking over to further investigate. Folco spots a small trail leading towards the eastern end of Rollo's property, dipping and running into the high hay itself. Investigating further, both Folco and Bearlac, as they inch their way closer to the edges of the high hay, the hair on their back of their necks begin to rise, as they get the uncanny feeling they're being watched, but more than Rollo and the handful of other hobbits viewing from the distance. Suddenly, and without warning, the form of a large wolf-like creature, black as coal, with eyes as red as the setting sun low on the horizon, leaps out from the long shadow cast from the rising sun against the high hay, and with its huge, gaping jaw strikes at Folco, who, despite his best attempts, failed to leap out of the way. But as fast as the attack came from the beast occurred, it ran down the path spotted by Folco and vanished into the darkened wood of the old forest. "Are you all right?" Bearlac asked Folco. "Took a nasty bite in my shoulder, it did. The thing is fast. I'm going to need to rest up a bit before we chase into the forest. You know much about it, the forest that is?" Folco, slowly moving over to a rock and sitting down and resting his bow and spear alongside it. Bearlac, shaking his head no. "Nah, not much I know about the old forest, save for it being here. Woody End is my ground. You'd think it's similar, but all I know is this place is darker than a cave in the hills of Scary." Folco rubbed his now bruised shoulder, thankful that the tough leather of his shirt kept the fangs from puncturing into his flesh. Looking around, he noticed something gently moving in the early morning breeze. Walking over, he removes what appears to be a few tufts of blackened fur caught on a small hinge. Either way, Bearlac, the beast, dare I say beasts, looks to be coming from inside the old forest. Folco, turning to Bearlac and Rollo, a look of a visible wave of fear on his face. Taking a deep breath, Folco turned to look at the trail, what was visible of the old forest over the hedge. "If we don't hunt this wolf now, no telling what matter of trouble it'll bring to this place. We shall leave soon while the trail is still fresh." A number of moments pass, and Folco, his shoulder now feeling a little looser, grabbed his bow and spear. "Let's go!" And with that, and with the good luck from Rollo Boffin, Folco and Bearlac, following the trail and walking through the gate opening up to beyond the wall of the high hay, disappeared into the old forest. A number of hobbits, now gathered on the boundaries of Rollo's property, muttered to themselves, each chattering about the early morning events, some even placing wagers on if the two foreigners returned from the depths of the old forest. The pair of hobbits trekked slowly into the old forest. Sounds of creaking trees and the wind whistling through the branches echo through the darkened expanse. The bright sun of the early morning fades as they walk deeper. Turning around, Folco barely seeing the green hedge of the high hay as it disappears from view, as if the tree themselves moved to hide it. Folco takes a deep swallow, looks to Bearlac, and nods to continue into the forest. Bearlac, swinging his axe around from off his shoulders, and as he does, the moan and groan of the forest echoes throughout. The branches of the collection of trees, all gnarled and bent, seem to reach out for the pair of hobbits, barely brushing against them as they walk through. A path lay before them, and as they follow it, it opens up into a wide, bare space where, unlike the rest of the forest, no tree grows. Forming a wide circle, the warmth of the sun hits the duo, each relaxing for a brief moment to catch their breath. They continue to the other side of the clearing and back into the reaching branches of the gnarled, twisted, and dark trees of the old wood. "This is an ancient wood, and it has a feeling of dread unlike the woody end," Bearlac commented to Folco. "It almost feels like these trees are watching us as we go through." The trees again moaned, creaked, and branches and exposed roots seemingly grasping for Bearlac and Folco's arms and legs. What had been a good path that was easy to follow upon entering the thick wood, now is but a hope that they know that they follow the path. But, both being seasoned veterans of the hunt, Folco familiar with the chetwood, and Bearlac the woody end, they continue to find signs of the trail left behind by the creature. A number of hours pass, and breaking for a quick breather, a morsel of mushrooms Folco had given to him by Farmer Maggot, they both gathered some extra strength and resolve for the continued hunt. Bearlac, agitated by the closeness of the trees, the hanging branches and the thick covering of the roots, brandished again his axe, ready to chop some of the reaching branches and growth away. The forest angrily moaned and groaned, and a buzzing sound started to emanate from behind one of the old trees. Before Bearlac knew it, and then Folco, a swarm of huge gnats surrounded them, stung at their faces, necks, wrists, and any area exposed, especially their feet, typical of any hobbit. "Quick, let's get out of here," Bearlac yelled, as both he and Folco darted away from the stinging flies. It took about 20 minutes of running, weaving to and fro, before the cloud of flies dissipated, each of them now red, bleeding, and as demoralized as one could from such an experience. "Best not be thinking ill will of the forest, lest we go through something like worse than that," Folco whispered to Bearlac. "Let's keep up to the trail and to ourselves. Don't need to anger this wood any more than we already have." Whether it was the thick wood or not, the pair of hobbits silently walked through the forest, keeping to the trail left by the creature, further going deeper and deeper into the old forest, twisting and turning, but keeping to what both thought was a southeasterly direction. The low sound of a passing water against root and rock could be heard just off in the distance, and as they approached, Folco signaled to stop Bearlac, both now crouched behind a fallen, rotting tree. Just ahead, a stone's throw away, they saw it. The creature, a large wolf by the looks of it, prowled along the banks of what Folco and Bearlac wagered was the Withywindle, the river that ran from the old forest just at the edges of the Barrow Downs westward into the Brandywine. Folco wagered the beast was waiting for them, but for whatever reason they did not sense that they were there yet. Looking around, Folco noticed off to the side of the woodland open to reveal a great thorn thicket that was, to hobbits at least, impossibly large and twisted. A pair of deep red eyes emerged out of the shadows, and to the dismay of both Folco and Bearlac, they realized that not only was the one wolf before them, but now another. Folco, showing a sign of disbelief, realized that the second was none other than the one he had felled the night before. How could this be? He muttered under his breath. A slight breeze blew through the forest, down from the location across the thicket. The scent of the two hobbits going across the nares of the two wolves each on now turning their large heads, their deep, fiery red eyes now focused on the pair. Bearlac quickly knocked an arrow. Folco readied his spear. Kill or be killed was the thought both hobbits had come across both their minds. Folco, standing, his shoulder pulled backwards, his wrist fixed and his hands grasping the shaft of the spear, launches it forwards towards the wolf, prowling the banks of the Withywindle. Folco thought he launched it good, but whether the beast moved or hitting an overhanging branch, the spear fell short. Folco quickly pulled out and knocked an arrow into his bow, readying it for when the wolf eventually would counter. Bearlac pulled back the string of his bow, taking aim at the wolf crawling out under the deep thicket, and after taking a slow breath out, let go, the arrow striking true into the chest walls of the black wolf. Folco, skirmishing behind a tree, turns and takes careful aim at the closest to him. The bow creaked under the draw, and with taking little time to think, Folco released the arrow, and although striking true, the arrow harmlessly bounced off the toughened hair and hide of the now leaping creature facing Folco. The wolf landed next to Folco, and with its open maw, dug its pink-stained fangs into the forward-facing shoulder of Folco. Fortunately for Folco, the toughened leather held true, and the fangs did not pierce into his flesh. Folco grimaced with the shouting pain now flowing down through his arm. Bearlac, dropping his bow and readying his axe, let out a battle cry and charged the other beasts. Swinging down with his axe, but losing his footing, it landed just shy of the creature's left front leg and large paw. The wolf, now in reach, turned its now grappling maw and clamped its blood-stained teeth into the right exposed forearm of Bearlac. Bearlac let out a loud cry of pain as blood now gushed from the puncture wounds left by the creature's sharpened fangs. Folco pulled back and scurried behind again another nearby tree, taking aim and knocking back another arrow, releasing the bolt this time, had the head of the arrow striking deep into the flesh of the wolf beast. The wolf snarled in pain and brandished its fangs at Folco, and lurched forward for another attack, but this time only scraping the back of the tree Folco took cover behind. Bearlac swung his axe back and all over the top of the wolf engaged with him, but the wolf, despite its size, jolted back so that the axe head once again missed and just grazing the side of its fur, the sharpened blade shaving some of the coarse hair off its coat. The wolf again, in kind, lurched forward, and with a fierce crunch clenched its fangs, this time around Bearlac's other arm. Bearlac again let out an even louder scream of pain, blood spurting out now across the creature's head and torso and over the chest and face of Bearlac. Bearlac loosened the grasp he had around his axe. His vision began to fade slightly as a wave of weariness came across his body. Folco sprung across and behind the wolf, and as he knocked another arrow and set to aim, he slipped on some moss-covered root, the arrow flying off into a nearby tree. The forest groaned and moaned, and the branches weaved to and fro. The wolf growled and turned to launch back at Folco, mouth again brandishing its fangs, but it missed Folco once again, digging its fang into the nearby root. Bearlac pulled back from the wolf facing him, and garnered what strength he had left, pulled the axe back and across his chest. As the wolf leaps for him, he set the axe head facing it, and although it didn't pierce the tough fur and skin of the beast, the fangs of the creature scraped and scratched the hardened metal of the axe head. Folco, turning around, pulling out another arrow from his back quiver and taking a few steps, pulled back and shot an arrow at the lunging wolf. The arrow harmlessly bounced off the fur of the wolf once again, but seemingly distracted enough from its attack that it missed entirely Folco's left flank. The wolf now wrestles Bearlac against a nearby tree, its huge frame and weight of its body pinning Bearlac against the bark. Despite his best efforts to bring the axe head into its chest, the wolf managed to bite down hard into Bearlac's shoulder, its fangs digging deep into Bearlac's flesh, touching bone of his shoulder blade. Bearlac lets out a loud cry again of pain, blood now spurting and pulsing out, the bite obviously hitting a major artery. Bearlac's vision started to fade as the edges of his vision started to blacken, the salivating fanged mouth of the wolf the last he saw before starting to black out. Folco looked over at the cry from Bearlac to see the wolf going in for another bite, but before the wolf dug deep again into the upper torso of the pinned hardy hobbit, the sound of a merry singing ran through the forest. the wolf ready to set its jaws into Bearlac, and the wolf staring down Folco, ready to take advantage of the now distracted hobbit, both cocked their heads towards the sound of the singing, and both in unison stepped back from the hobbit duo. Folco looked over and to his surprise saw a figure, larger than a hobbit but smaller than a man, gingerly dancing through the forest as if at a spring festival, wearing a blue overcoat, brown pants, and bright yellow boots. As he enters the clearing, by the thicket where the battle has raged, he looks over to Folco, and with the tip of his great floppy hat and a bow, and after straightening his jacket, he breaks out into a kind of sing-song rhyme. Hey ho, silly ho, tramp across the forest, little creatures underfoot, black dogs are the sorest. Go now, silly dogs, cast away your ire. Hobbits only hope to help. Come now, little dogs, no need to be so dire. Coming to the spot between the hobbits, the wolves back off from the new arrival and break and flee away from his presence. The figure turns to Folco and then to Bearlac, who now lay slumped forward, shallowly breathing, his axe now laying on the ground near his feet. The figure moves over and carefully brushes Bearlac, and within moments Bearlac takes in a deep breath and wide-eyed spots the gentleman in front of him. Come now, my fellow friends, let you rest your weary heads, over yonder, up the withy window, before the stars shine and twinkle. Almost as if under a spell, both Folco and Bearlac took the gentleman up on his offer. As the figure guided them through the thickened wood, Folco noticed that the trees, like the wolves before, seemed to break and move away from this merry fellow. Folco and Bearlac later learned that the mysterious gentleman was none other than Tom Bombadil, the Master. Coming to a clearing in the eastern edges of the old forest before the Barrow Downs and along the banks of the Withywindle, Folco spots what would surely be the home of Tom. A feeling of warmth and peace, unlike that of the forest wood surrounding it, pass over Folco and Bearlac, and any awareness that they had fades to a distant memory. Like a carefully maintained garden of any Shire hobbit, the surrounding grasses, flowers, and hedges of the home are exquisite and beautiful. Folco unable to recognize most of the species of plants and flowers, however. Evening approaches and Tom bids them to rest and spend the night in the quiet comfort and peace of his home. No foul creature of the wood or anywhere will haunt them here. Folco and Bearlac graciously accept. Where else would they go? Not quite in the sing-song rhyme as they had heard before, Tom does speak in a poetic manner about the beasts that have haunted the old forest and now into the Shire. The hounds, yes, just simple hounds, were once owned by a lord of men, residing long ago in a tower of stone which rose among the hills, which are now known to those as the Barrow Downs. During a terrible war, the lord had perished among flames and his faithful hounds with him. Evil spirits descended upon the Barrow Downs many years later. The hounds returned as dark reflections of what they once were. They aren't entirely evil, Tom continues to tell, and still a light of goodness and hope dwell within them. Unfortunately, between the ill will of the old forest and the passing of time, the creature's malice continues to grow. Kind hounds they once were, and yet not evil makes them growl. If one could sing a song true, then faithful friends be thy two. Folco and Bearlac, enthralled by the presence of Tom, wholeheartedly agree, and Tom spends the rest of the evening teaching the two hobbits the songs to soothe the savage beasts, and advises the pair of hobbits to think and name the beasts once the songs have been sung. It'll take them a while, and they must finish the singing through in order to bring back the hounds from the darkness. Folco and Bearlac looked at each other, and spent the evening thinking of names. Odd that they are naming such foul creatures, but do this they must. Morning comes, and Folco and Bearlac are greeted by one of the most fairest creatures they have ever laid eyes on, Goldberry, Tom's wife. As Folco and Bearlac eat a fine breakfast of fresh berries and other fruits that Goldberry presented after having picked them earlier before, Goldberry tells them that the pair of beasts are still at their lair, prowling around the thorny thicket. After the quick breakfast, Goldberry bids them farewell, and as they leave the serenity of Tom's home and the calming presence of Miss Goldberry, Tom greets them outside the home and bids them a good day, and reminds them again about the songs and completing them to their fullest, lest the creatures remain foul and evil. Then off Tom jaunts merrily past into the river, off to collect river lilies for his fair maiden. Folco and Bearlac looked at each other, mouths slightly open in awe. wondering how they'll explain the past day's events to the Master of Buckland, Farmer Maggot, and to Bilbo Baggins. None will believe what had transpired. Then a thought came across Falco's mind. "No worries, Bearlac. If we don't sing well enough, no worries on what we'll have to say to the others, because we won't have to," Falco said half-heartedly. Bearlac grinned and nodded in agreement, and then pointed down the path they travelled earlier along the bank of the Withywindle. Following the bank for some time and nearing the thicket, both Falco and Bearlac spot the beasts. With no time to think, the duo rush in to meet the beasts, and once within earshot, they start to sing the songs from Tom Bombadil. Folco recites the first, the spell of the words seemingly causing the creatures to writhe and buck as if in pain, as one was being burned by an open flame. Bearlac followed suit, and in a similar fashion the beasts moved to and fro, continuing to writhe in pain from the sound of the song sung by the two hobbits. The beasts shook their large heads and growled at the singing, both leaping, one each at the fully exposed hobbits. Falco reacted and stepped to the side mid-song, the wolf landing near but missing with its open maw. Bearlac wasn't so fortunate. The second, slightly larger wolf, the one Falco later would realize he met at the ferry, landed on Bearlac, knocking him back and biting him hard into his shoulder and neck. The sharpened teeth and fangs pierced deep into Bearlac's neck, hitting the carotid artery, and as it pulled back, taking and ripping flesh from Bearlac's neck, blood spurted and gushed out from Bearlac's now motionless body. Falco looked down at Bearlac and, despite being completely awestruck, found enough resolve to find his breath and sing the last of the songs. But the sight of Bearlac and the blood now pooling around him too much, and he lost his place. Both wolves now facing Falco, mouths open and salivating in anticipation of fresh meat. The first wolf struck and knocked Falco back against a tree, slightly winding him, but in doing so opened up for the other to leap in and bite deep down into the leg of Falco. Falco let out a loud scream as the pain of the bite into his thigh muscle shocked through his body. Falco looked into the air, deep into his lungs, and with the foul-smelling breath of both beasts across his face, sung the last rhyme Tom taught them the last evening. The words echoed through the forest, and whether through magic or just the way it sounds, the beasts immediately stepped back and started to slowly retreat. Falco looked, and before him the black as coal wolves started to change, first their bodies shrinking into the size of a medium-sized hound, and then the eyes changing from fiery red to a pale, cool blue. Then Falco remembered Tom's words, the hounds must be named. Falco, shaking his head, spoke two names, not the original ones they had decided, but ones that just quickly came across his mind, Chuck and Barry. And with that, the ghastly creatures now appeared to be playful, otherwise lovable hounds, barking cheerfully at Falco. They then darted off into the direction of Tom's house along the banks of the Withywindle and out of sight. Falco, with a smile across his face, suddenly then realized and hearing the gasping, labored breathing of Bearlac nearby. Running over, he quickly surveys the scene and his condition. It's not promising, but Falco tries to cover the gaping wound with a tear from his shirt, but to no avail. Within a few short, shallow breaths, Bearlac's body lay motionless. Falco kneeling back in a complete sadness and sorrow. He hadn't seen anyone die before his eyes, and the event would be now a lasting memory. No sooner had Bearlac passed, the forest started to moan and groan. Before Falco's eyes, the roots of the trees started to wrap around the body of Bearlac and drag it deeper into the ground. Falco jumped back at the sight, as Bearlac's body was now pulled further and further and out of sight. Then Falco noticed something peculiar. The hunting knife that had once been on his belt and his trusted axe remained. Falco wagered that the forest left it there as a parting gift for Falco's friend, or it simply despised the foreign objects and wished them gone. Falco figured that the latter was to be true. This old wood is too foul a thing to be that kind and thoughtful. Picking up Bearlac's axe and knife, and not wanting to tarry any longer than he should, he proceeded back out the forest whence they originally came. The forest seemed to open the path, unlike before where it seemingly tried to stop them in their trek in, but back out to the Shire as if it wanted Falco gone as quickly as a hobbit could walk. So before long, Falco reached the gate of the High Hay to Crick Hollow, and was greeted by a few happy and not so happy hobbits, those who wagered neither would return on the other side. Well, It is a good sight to see you, Folco, but where is your companion, Birlac? I don't see him behind you. Gorbadoc Brandybuck asked Folco, all concerned. Folco gave a sullen nod of his head, no, and spoke no words. Gorbadoc continued, And of the beast? With little fanfare, Folco responded, The Black Wolf of Woody End and its mate won't be bothering the Shire no more. Folco, nodding to Gorbadoc, dropped his head and walked past. Gorbadoc responded, I and the people of Buckland thank you. Folco didn't show any sign to Gorbadoc that he heard him, as he continued to walk past Rollo's place and the gathered crew of hobbits. Gorbadoc spoke loudly to the gathered crowd of Kirkhollow. Pass word to all in Buckland that the beast will haunt our lands no more. Cheers rang out from the crowd, but Folco cared not, and as he walked and the sound of the crowd faded, Folco could only think of the fate befallen Barrowlack.